wanted to be the farmer's husband until her gentle heart won him over. What if every man passed you by, not because you weren't enough, but because they didn't know how to receive your kind of love? In the mining town of Silverton, Colorado, Hannah Bellamy was the woman no one courted. Too quiet, too strong, too strange. But there's always one man the world breaks, just enough to see someone like her. Do you believe real love still exists in quiet places? If this opening moved you, comment, "Gentle hearts are strong," and subscribe to help us keep telling stories that matter. The autumn sun cast long shadows across Silverton's main square as the monthly town auction commenced. Hannah Bellamy stood at the edge of the crowd, clutching a basket of her finest preserves: peach, apricot, and wild berry, each jar sealed with care and labeled in her precise handwriting. At 28, Hannah had learned to expect disappointment, but hope died hard in hearts like hers. She watched as other women's goods commanded enthusiastic bidding: Martha Fleming's quilts, Betty Morrison's pies, even young Sarah Mitchell's somewhat lumpy bread loaves. "What am I bid for these fine preserves from Miss Bellamy's farm?" called out auctioneer Murphy, holding up her basket with noticeably less enthusiasm than he'd shown for the previous lots. The crowd shifted uncomfortably. Men who had been jovial and competitive moments before suddenly found their boots fascinating. Others discovered urgent reasons to examine the sky or study the distant mountains. "Come now, gentlemen," Murphy pressed, his voice carrying forced joviality that fooled no one. "These are the finest preserves in the county. Miss Bellamy's peaches are renowned throughout the territory. Surely worth $1 to start." The silence stretched like a taut wire ready to snap. Hannah felt heat creep up her neck as whispers began to ripple through the crowd like wind through wheat. "Strange woman, that one," muttered Jake Morrison to his companion, not bothering to lower his voice. "Lives alone on that big farm, talks to her plants like they're people. My Betty says she caught her singing to her apple trees." "Peculiar ain't the half of it," added Tom Fletcher, shaking his head. 28 years old and still unmarried. That's not natural for a woman. Makes a man wonder what's wrong with her that we can't see. Too independent, pronounced Henry Walsh, the bank manager, with the authority of a man who considered his opinion valuable. What man wants a wife who thinks she can handle everything herself? A woman should need her husband, not act like she can run a farm better than most men. Hannah's hands trembled slightly as she gripped her basket tighter. She'd heard variations of these comments for years, but they never stopped stinging. The truth was, she did talk to her plants. They were better listeners than most people. And yes, she had learned to handle her farm alone after her father's death, but not by choice. Necessity had been her teacher, not defiance. Finally, old Mrs. Patterson raised a weathered hand, her kind eyes meeting Hannah's across the crowd. 50 cents, she called out, her voice strong despite her 70-odd years. "Sold," Murphy declared with obvious relief, eager to move past the awkward moment. Hannah stepped forward to collect her meager earnings, barely enough to cover the sugar and flour she needed for next month's preserves. As she walked away, head held high despite the humiliation burning in her chest, she caught the tail end of Betty Morrison's cutting whisper. 28 years old and still trying to catch a husband with jam jars. Some women just aren't made for loving, I suppose. Maybe it's a mercy. Can you imagine any man wanting to come home to that strange creature every night? The words followed Hannah home like a pack of hunting dogs, nipping at her heels with every step. That same evening, as Hannah tended her garden in the fading golden light of sunset, she noticed a figure slumped against her barn door. At first glance, she thought it might be a pile of discarded clothing or perhaps a lost traveler's pack. But as she drew closer, she realized it was a man. He was tall but gaunt, wearing a tattered Union Army coat that had once been blue but now faded to the color of storm clouds. A jagged scar ran from his left temple to his jaw, pale and raised against weathered skin. His right hand rested at an odd angle against his thigh, damaged, she realized, perhaps in the war that had claimed so many of their county's young men. He startled when he saw her approaching, scrambling to his feet with the quick, nervous movements of someone accustomed to being unwelcome. His eyes, a startling green even in the dim light, darted from her face to the road behind her, as if calculating the fastest escape route. "Ma'am," he said, removing his worn cap to reveal dark hair streaked with premature gray. "I'm deeply sorry for trespassing on your property. I was looking for shelter for the night. I can work for food if you'll have me. I'm handy with repairs and good with animals." Hannah studied his face, noting the wariness that sat in his eyes like a wild animal ready to bolt. She'd seen that look before, in wounded creatures that had learned humans usually meant pain or rejection. There was dignity in his posture despite his obvious desperation, and something in his voice suggested education and good breeding fallen on hard times. "What's your name?" she asked quietly, keeping her voice gentle so as not to spook him. "Bo Ellis, ma'am. Sergeant Bo Ellis, formerly of the 5th Colorado Infantry Regiment." He straightened slightly as he said it, muscle memory bringing military bearing to his battered frame. "You served in the war?" "Yes, ma'am. 3 years, until..." He gestured vaguely at his scarred face and damaged hand, then let his arm drop as if the weight of the memories was too much to hold. Hannah nodded slowly. She'd heard the stories that filtered back from the war, boys who'd marched away with songs on their lips and returned as hollow-eyed men carrying invisible wounds alongside the visible ones. The newspapers called them heroes, but she'd seen enough of them passing through Silverton to know that heroism was a cold comfort when you couldn't sleep for the nightmares or hold a cup steady because of damaged nerves. "The barn's warm enough," she said simply, surprising herself with the immediate decision. "There's fresh hay in the loft and clean blankets in the tack room. Supper's at 6 if you're of a mind to join me." Relief flickered across his features. So quickly she almost missed it, like sunlight breaking through clouds before disappearing again. "Thank you, ma'am. I give you my word. I won't be any trouble. I'll work hard and move on whenever you say." "Everyone's trouble sometimes, Mr. Ellis," Hannah replied, thinking of her own reputation in town. "The question is whether they're worth the trouble." Hannah woke before dawn, as was her custom, and found herself preparing breakfast for two, without consciously deciding to do so. Biscuits rose in the oven while eggs sizzled in her cast-iron skillet alongside thick slices of bacon from her own smokehouse. Coffee percolated on the stove, filling her kitchen with warmth and the promise of sustenance. When she stepped outside to call Bo for breakfast, she discovered him already at work, mucking out her chicken coop with meticulous care. Despite his damaged hand, his movements were efficient and practiced. He'd found her tools and organized them properly, cleaned the water troughs, and scattered fresh feed with the careful attention of someone who understood that animals deserved respect and proper care. "Mr. Ellis," she called softly, not wanting to startle him. He turned, and she saw something unexpected in his eyes: contentment. For a moment, the wariness was gone, replaced by the satisfaction of meaningful work well done. "Morning, Miss Bellamy," he said, touching his cap respectfully. "Hope you don't mind me starting early. Your chickens were looking a bit cramped, and I thought they'd appreciate some attention." "I don't mind at all. Breakfast is ready, if you'd like to join me." At her kitchen table, the first time she'd shared it with anyone since her father's death 3 years ago, Bo ate with the careful politeness of a man who'd learned not to take hospitality for granted. He complimented her biscuits with genuine appreciation, asked thoughtful questions about her farm, and listened with real attention when she spoke about her peach trees and vegetable garden. "You manage all this alone?" he asked, gesturing toward the window that framed her neat rows of crops, the orderly barn, the well-maintained fences that spoke of constant care. "For 3 years now, since my father passed from consumption." "That's..." He paused, seemed to consider his words carefully. "That's a tremendous amount of work for anyone to handle single-handedly." Hannah waited for the usual commentary about women and farming, about her unusual situation, about how she should have found a husband to take over the responsibilities. Instead, Bo simply nodded with what appeared to be genuine respect. "Your father taught you well," he said finally. "He'd be proud of what you've accomplished here." It was such a simple statement, but it hit Hannah with unexpected force. When was the last time anyone had acknowledged her work as an accomplishment rather than an oddity? Over the following days, Bo proved himself a quiet, thoughtful worker who seemed to understand the rhythm of farm life instinctively. He repaired her sagging fence without being asked, tended her livestock with gentle efficiency, and approached every task with the methodical patience of a man who understood that good work was its own reward. What surprised Hannah most was how he watched her work, not with the calculating assessment sheet, grown accustomed to from other men, but with genuine curiosity and respect. When she explained her crop rotation system, he listened as if her words held real wisdom. When she demonstrated her technique for grafting fruit trees, he asked intelligent questions that showed he valued her knowledge rather than merely tolerating it. "You've got a gift," he told her one afternoon as they worked together to harvest the last of her late squash. The autumn air was crisp with the promise of winter, and their breath made small clouds as they worked. For what? For growing things. For understanding what they need. He cradled a butternut squash in his good hand, examining it with appreciation. This didn't happen by accident. This kind of garden takes knowledge, patience, intuition. Hannah felt warmth spread through her chest, not just from the compliment, but from the way he said it, as if her farming expertise was something remarkable rather than merely strange. "Most men seem to think my farming makes me less of a woman," she said, testing the waters of this unusual acceptance. Bo paused in his work, straightening to meet her eyes directly. "Miss Bellamy, the way I see it, anyone who can coax life from the ground and make it flourish. That's about the most feminine thing there is. That's creation itself. That's the closest thing to miracle most of us ever witness." Hannah had to look away from the sincerity in his eyes, but she carried his words with her like a warm stone. In her pocket, that evening, Hannah sat at her kitchen table with pen and paper, trying to capture the feelings that had been growing in her heart like seedlings reaching towards sunlight. She'd always been better with written words than spoken ones, finding comfort in the way ink could hold thoughts that seemed too fragile for the air. "Dear Bo," she wrote, then stopped, her pen hovering over the paper like a bird afraid to land. How could she tell him that his presence had changed everything? That for the first time in her 28 years, she felt truly seen, not as the strange woman who farmed alone, but as someone whose thoughts and efforts had value? She tried. "Again, I want you to know that having you here has made me remember what it feels like to not be completely alone in the world." Too forward, too revealing. She crumpled the paper and started over. "The work feels lighter when shared with someone who understands its value. Thank you for seeing my efforts as worthwhile rather than merely peculiar." Still not right. How could? She explained that he'd given her something she'd stopped hoping for. The simple gift of being appreciated as she was, without the constant pressure to change or apologize for her independence. She tried several more times. "Your respect means more to me than you know. I find myself looking forward to our conversations. You make me feel less strange and more simply myself." Each attempt felt either too bold or too inadequate. In the end, she wrote nothing that felt adequate to the growing tenderness in her heart. Instead, she folded the blank paper and slipped it into her apron pocket, carrying the unspoken words like a secret that might, someday, find the courage to be shared. Bo had his own way of communicating the things that felt too large or too delicate for ordinary speech. Each morning, Hannah discovered small improvements around her farm: a loose board secured, a wobbly fence post straightened, weeds cleared from around her herb garden with surgical precision. But it was the words he carved that spoke directly to her heart. On the gatepost leading to her peach orchard, she found carved in careful, flowing letters, patience grows the sweetest fruit. Along the fence rail by her vegetable garden, strong roots weather any storm. And on the beam above her barn door, where she would see it every morning as she began her chores, some gardens are worth tending. Hannah traced each carving with her fingertips, marveling at the skill that had shaped them despite his damaged hand. The letters were beautiful, not just legible but elegant, suggesting an education and refinement that made his current circumstances all the more poignant. These weren't just messages, they were promises carved in wood that would outlast the seasons. They spoke of permanence, of intention, of a man who saw value in what she'd built and wanted to be part of preserving it. Word of Beau's presence at Hannah's farm spread through Silverton like wildfire in dry grass. By the end of his first week, the speculation had reached a fever pitch that made Hannah's previous status as the town's unmarriageable spinster seem quaint by comparison. "It's unseemly," declared Betty Morrison at the general store, her voice carrying clearly to where Hannah stood selecting supplies. A single woman housing a strange man, and a damaged one at that. It reflects poorly on all of us. "My husband says he looks dangerous," added Martha Fleming, lowering her voice to the stage whisper that guaranteed maximum audience. "That scar on his face, what kind of man gets marked up like that?" "The kind that's seen too much violence," suggested Mrs. Weatherby with dark satisfaction. "Mark my words, no good will come of this arrangement." Hannah's hands trembled as she counted out coins for her purchases, acutely aware that every eye in the store was fixed on her. The judgment felt heavier than usual, weighted with genuine concern about her safety, mixed with the usual disapproval of her unconventional choices. "Hannah, dear," said Mrs. Patterson gently, approaching with obvious concern, "perhaps you should consider. That is, are you certain this arrangement is wise? We all worry about you, living so far from town with a stranger." The kindness in Mrs. Patterson's voice was almost harder to bear than the open hostility of the others. Hannah appreciated the concern, but it stung nonetheless. "Mr. Ellis is a veteran," Hannah said quietly but firmly. "He served our country honorably and deserves our respect, not our suspicion." "But Hannah," Betty Morrison interjected, "you can't possibly know what kind of man he really is, what he might be capable of. I know he works hard, treats my animals kindly, and has shown me nothing but courtesy and respect," Hannah replied, her voice gaining strength. "That's more than I can say for some men who've never left this county." The pointed comment landed with satisfying accuracy, causing several of the more gossipy women to flush and look away. That night, Hannah woke to the sound of someone moving around outside her house. Fear shot through her. Perhaps the gossips had been right about Beau after all. She crept to her window and peered through the curtains, her heart hammering against her ribs. What she saw stopped her cold. Beau sat on her front steps in the moonlight, his head in his hands, shoulders shaking with what she realized were sobs. The proud, controlled man who worked so carefully during the day had collapsed under the weight of whatever demons he carried. Hannah's first instinct was to go to him, but something held her back. This was private grief, the kind that needed darkness and solitude to emerge. Instead, she watched and listened, her heart breaking for the pain she could feel radiating from his hunched form. "Sarah," she heard him whisper to the night air. "God, Sarah, I'm so sorry. I should have been there. I should have protected you." The name hit Hannah like a physical blow. Sarah. There had been someone, a wife, perhaps, or a sweetheart, someone he'd lost. The pieces began forming a picture she didn't want to see. A young soldier leaving home with promises to return, only to come back too late, too broken, too changed. Beau's quiet sobs continued, punctuated by fragments of words. "Should have died instead. Can't even hold a cup steady. What use am I to anyone now?" Hannah pressed her hand to her mouth to stifle her own tears. She understood now why he'd seemed so grateful for simple kindness, why he worked with such desperate intensity. He was a man trying to prove his worth to a world that had taken everything from him. Eventually, Beau's grief subsided into exhausted silence. He sat for a long time looking up at the stars, and Hannah found herself wondering what he saw there. Memories of happier times, or just the cold indifference of a universe that had dealt him more pain than one man should have to bear. When he finally rose and walked back to the barn, Hannah remained at her window, understanding that everything between them had changed. Not because she'd learned about his loss, but because she'd witnessed his vulnerability and found it only made her care for him more. The next morning brought Dr. Samuel Harrison to Hannah's door, not for a medical emergency, but as an unofficial representative of the town's concern for her welfare. Dr. Harrison was a good man, one of the few in Silverton who'd always treated Hannah with consistent respect, which made his visit all the more troubling. "Hannah," he said, settling into her kitchen chair with the comfortable familiarity of an old family friend. "I hope you don't mind me speaking plainly. I've never known you to speak any other way, Dr. Harrison. There's considerable talk in town about your house guest." Hannah poured coffee with steady hands, though her stomach churned with apprehension. "I'm sure there is. People are worried about you. A man like that, damaged by war, possibly unstable, living so close to you. Hannah, you must understand their concern." "What I understand," Hannah said carefully, "is that Mr. Ellis is a veteran who deserves our gratitude, not our suspicion." Dr. Harrison leaned forward, his expression earnest. "My dear, I've treated enough soldiers to know that war changes men in ways we can't always see. The mind can be wounded just as surely as the body. Sometimes those wounds make men unpredictable." Hannah thought of Beau's midnight breakdown, of the grief and self-loathing she'd witnessed. "He's not dangerous, Dr. Harrison. He's hurt. And hurt men can be the most dangerous of all, especially to kind-hearted women who want to help them." The conversation was interrupted by Beau himself, returning from his morning chores. He stopped short when he saw Dr. Harrison, and Hannah watched his face close off, becoming carefully neutral. "Mr. Ellis," Dr. Harrison said, rising to extend his hand. "I don't believe we've been formally introduced. I'm Dr. Samuel Harrison." Beau shook the offered hand with his left, his damaged right remaining at his side. "Sergeant Beau Ellis. Is Miss Bellamy unwell?" No, nothing like that. I was simply checking on our Hannah here, making sure she's managing well." The emphasis on our Hannah wasn't lost on Beau, whose jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. "Miss Bellamy seems to manage everything quite well, from what I've observed." "Yes, well, she's always been capable." Dr. Harrison's tone suggested this wasn't entirely a compliment. Perhaps too capable for her own good sometimes. Hannah felt heat rise in her cheeks at being discussed as if she weren't present. "I'm sitting right here, Dr. Harrison." "Of course, my dear. I simply meant that your independent nature, while admirable, sometimes leads you to take on more than you should, such as housing strange men without proper consideration of the implications." "The implications," Hannah said, her voice growing cold, "are that I offered Christian charity to a man in need. I wasn't aware that had become a controversial position in our community." Beau cleared his throat softly. "Perhaps I should move on," he said quietly. "I wouldn't want to cause Miss Bellamy any difficulty with her neighbors." "No," Hannah said, quickly, surprising herself with the vehemence of her response. "You've done nothing wrong, Mr. Ellis. Nothing that should require you to leave." Dr. Harrison's eyebrows rose at her emphatic defense. "Hannah, perhaps we could speak privately? Anything you have to say to me can be said in front of Mr. Ellis." Hannah replied, crossing her arms. "He's not going anywhere." After Dr. Harrison left, clearly unsatisfied with the outcome of his visit, Hannah found herself alone with Beau in her kitchen, the air thick with unspoken questions and concerns. "I should go," Beau said finally, not meeting her eyes. "I don't want to cause trouble for you." "You're not causing trouble." Other people are causing trouble by refusing to mind their own business. Miss Bellamy. Bo struggled with his words. I'm grateful for your kindness, more grateful than you know. But Dr. Harrison isn't wrong about everything. I am damaged. By the war, by other things. I'm not the kind of man a respectable woman should associate with. Hannah studied his profile, noting the tension in his jaw, the way he held himself, as if preparing for rejection. What kind of man do you think you are, Mr. Ellis? The question seemed to catch him off guard. I'm broken, he said finally. I can't even hold a rifle steady anymore. Can't sleep through the night without nightmares. I lost everything that mattered to me, and I couldn't stop it from happening. So you think that makes you worthless? Doesn't it? He turned to face her then, and she saw the raw pain in his eyes. What good is a man who can't protect what he loves? Who can't even protect himself? Hannah moved closer, close enough to see the slight tremor in his damaged hand, close enough to feel the heat radiating from his body. Mr. Ellis, you've been here a week, and in that time, you've made my farm run more smoothly than it has in months. You've shown more consideration for my animals than most people show for their neighbors. You've treated me with more respect than men who've known me all my life. That's not just anything, she interrupted. That's character. That's worth. That's the kind of man any woman would be fortunate to know. Bo stared at her as if she'd spoken in a foreign language. You don't understand. I'm not. I can't be what you might need. What I need, Hannah said softly, is someone who sees me as more than the town spinster. Someone who treats my work as valuable rather than peculiar. Someone who doesn't try to change me into something more conventional. And you think I'm that someone? Hannah took a deep breath, knowing she was about to cross a line from which there might be no return. I think you already are. The first snow of winter arrived early, blanketing Hannah's farm in pristine white that transformed the familiar landscape into something magical. She woke to find Bo had already cleared a path from her house to the barn, stacked extra firewood by her door, and tended to all the animals. You didn't have to do all that, she said as they sat down to breakfast, both of them pink-cheeked from the cold. Habit, he said simply. In the army, you learn to take care of the practical things first. Everything else could wait. Is that how you think of this? As duty? Bo paused with his coffee cup halfway to his lips. No, he said slowly. This feels different. Better. Like the work matters for reasons beyond just survival. Over the following weeks, as winter settled in earnest around them, Hannah began to see glimpses of the man Bo had been before the war damaged him. He had a dry sense of humor that emerged during their evening conversations. He was well-read, able to discuss everything from agricultural techniques to poetry with equal intelligence. And he had a gentleness with her animals that spoke of a naturally kind heart. But it was the small gestures that touched her most deeply. The way he always served her coffee first. How he'd brush snow off her coat when she came in from chores. The careful attention he paid when she spoke, as if her words held real importance. You're a good listener, she told him one evening as they sat by her fireplace, the wind howling outside. You're worth listening to, he replied without hesitation. Most people seem to think my opinions are unusual. Most people, Bo said, his eyes fixed on the fire, have never had their certainties stripped away. They've never learned how much they don't know. That makes them poor judges of what's valuable and what's not. As winter deepened, Hannah found herself sharing stories she'd never told anyone. About her father's illness and death. About the loneliness of running the farm alone. About the constant weight of being different in a town that valued conformity above all else. Bo listened to it all without judgment, occasionally asking questions that showed he understood not just her words, but the emotions behind them. Do you ever regret not marrying? He asked one snowy evening. Hannah considered the question seriously. I regret not having the choice, she said finally. I regret that my independence seems to frighten men rather than attract them. But I don't. Regret refusing to settle for someone who would see me as a problem to be solved rather than a person to be loved. You shouldn't have to settle, Bo said firmly. Any man worth having would appreciate what you've accomplished here. Would he? Hannah looked around her cozy kitchen, at the home she'd created and maintained through her own efforts. Or would he want me to give it all up to play at being a conventional wife? The right man would want to be part of what you've built, not replace it. The conviction in his voice made Hannah's heart skip. You sound very certain about that. I am certain, Bo said, meeting her eyes. Because any man who couldn't see your worth wouldn't deserve you in the first place. As the weeks passed, Bo continued his habit of carving messages around Hannah's farm. But now the words became more personal, more intimate. On the windowsill of her kitchen, home is where the heart finds peace. Along the fence rail where they often stood together watching the sunset. Some views are better shared. And on the small bench he'd built for her back porch. Every garden needs a place to rest and dream. Hannah began leaving her own messages. For him, not carved, but written on small pieces of paper and tucked into places she knew he'd find them. In his coffee cup, thank you for making the mornings brighter. Tucked into his coat pocket, your presence is a gift I never expected. They never spoke about these exchanges directly, but Hannah noticed how Bo would smile when he found her notes, how he'd touch the places where he'd carved his words as if confirming they were still there. In February, disaster struck Hannah's farm when a tree, heavy with ice, crashed down on her chicken coop during a fierce storm. She woke to the sounds of distressed birds and splintering wood, her heart sinking as she realized the scope of the damage. Bo was already outside in his nightclothes and boots, working to free the trapped chickens. Together, they managed to save most of the flock, but the coop was destroyed and several birds were injured. I can rebuild it, Bo said immediately, surveying the wreckage in the gray dawn light. Better than before. Stronger. I can't afford. Hannah began, then stopped. She'd almost said she couldn't afford to pay him properly for such extensive work. But that would imply their relationship was still merely transactional, and she was beginning to understand it had become something much more complex. We can do it together, Bo said, understanding her hesitation. I know where to get good timber, and you know exactly how you want it designed. Partners. The word partners hung in the cold air between them, loaded with implications neither was quite ready to examine directly. The chicken coop project became a labor of love that brought Hannah and Bo closer than ever before. Working side by side, their hands occasionally brushing as they held boards or passed tools, they developed an easy rhythm that felt natural and right. Bo's damaged hand made some tasks difficult, but Hannah learned to anticipate when he needed help without making him feel inadequate. In return, he found ways to make her work easier, holding heavy pieces, while she positioned them, organizing materials so everything was within easy reach. You're good at this, Hannah told him as they framed the walls. I like working with my hands, Bo replied. During the war, everything was about destroying. This is about creating something that will last. Something that will matter, Hannah added, understanding the deeper meaning of his words. Yes, something that will matter. Spring brought with it not just warmer weather and new growth, but also renewed scrutiny from the town. As Hannah made her weekly trips to Silverton for supplies, she became increasingly aware of the whispered conversations that stopped when she appeared, the speculative looks, the careful distance maintained by people who had once at least nodded politely. There's talk, Mrs. Patterson warned her gently during one such visit. People are saying, well, they're wondering about your living arrangements, whether they're appropriate. Hannah felt her cheeks burn. Mr. Ellis sleeps in the barn, Mrs. Patterson. He's been nothing but respectful. I know, dear. I know. But appearances, in a small town like ours, appearances matter. People begin to assume. People assume what they want to assume regardless of the truth, Hannah said, her voice sharper than she intended. Perhaps, Mrs. Patterson said sadly. but their assumptions affect your reputation. And a woman's reputation, once damaged. The unfinished sentence hung between them like a threat. Hannah understood all too well what Mrs. Patterson was trying to tell her. In a place like Silverton, a woman's virtue was assumed to be as fragile as spun glass. The slightest breath of scandal could shatter it beyond repair. That evening, Hannah found Bo sitting on the bench he'd built, staring out at her budding fruit trees with an expression of such profound sadness that she couldn't help but sit beside him. "The town's talking," she said gently. "I know. I've heard some of it when I go for supplies." Bo's voice was tired, resigned. "They think I'm taking advantage of your kindness." "Are you?" Bo turned to look at her, startled by the direct question. "God, no. Hannah, I would never. I'd rather leave than see you hurt by gossip." "Then tell me," Hannah said softly. "Tell me about Sarah." Bo's whole body went rigid. "How do you? I heard you one night. You were sitting on my front steps, and you spoke her name." For a long moment, Bo said nothing. Then, slowly, the story began to pour out of him like water from a broken dam. Sarah had been his wife. They'd married young, before the war, and had been blissfully happy for the short time they'd had together. When Bo enlisted, Sarah had been pregnant with their first child. He'd promised to return in time for the birth, promised to keep them both safe. But the war had dragged on longer than anyone expected. By the time Bo returned, damaged, scarred, barely functional, he'd found their small house empty. Sarah had died in childbirth while he was fighting in distant battles. The baby had lived only 3 days. "I came home to graves," Bo said, his voice barely above a whisper. "2 graves I'd never seen, never tended. I'd failed at the most basic thing a man is supposed to do, protect his family." Hannah felt tears streaming down her cheeks. "Bo, that wasn't your fault, wasn't it? I chose to leave them. Chose duty over family. You chose to serve your country. You couldn't have known. I should have been there," Bo said with quiet intensity. "I should have found a way to be there when she needed me." Hannah reached for his damaged hand, holding it gently in both of hers. "You're here now," she said. "You're here with me. And I'm selfish enough to want to stay," Bo admitted. "Even though I know I have nothing to offer you but my damaged self." "Maybe," Hannah said carefully, "your damaged self is exactly what I need." Who's healing whom, Hannah or Bo? Share your thoughts in the comments. Your voice helps us grow this community of heart-driven stories. As spring turned towards summer, Hannah found herself thinking more and more about the future, about what it would mean to continue sharing her life with Bo, about the growing love she felt for him, about the whispers that followed them wherever they went in town. One evening, as they worked together in her garden, she gathered the courage to broach the subject that had been weighing on her mind. "Bo," she said, her hands busy with weeding to give herself something to focus on other than his reaction. "Have you ever thought about, that is, do you think you might want to stay here permanently?" Bo's hands stilled in the soil. "What are you asking, Hannah?" She took a deep breath. "I'm asking if you've considered that we could make this arrangement official. Marriage, I mean." The silence that followed felt like an eternity. When Hannah finally looked up, she saw something that looked almost like panic in Bo's eyes. "Hannah," he said carefully, "I care about you more than I have words to express. But marriage, I can't ask you to tie yourself to someone like me. You're not asking. I'm suggesting. And I'm telling you it wouldn't be fair to you." Bo sat back on his heels, his expression pained. "You deserve a whole man, someone who can give you children, someone who can provide for you properly." "I can provide for myself," Hannah said, hurt creeping into her voice. "I've been doing it for 3 years. That's not what I meant." "Then what did you mean? That I should settle for someone I don't love because he's undamaged? That I should give up the best thing that's ever happened to me because other people might disapprove?" Bo's face went pale. "The best thing that's ever happened to you." Hannah realized what she'd just admitted, but it was too late to take it back. "Yes," she said defiantly. "You. This. What we have together. Hannah, I love you." "Bo Ellis," she said, the words rushing out like a river overflowing its banks. I love your gentleness with my animals, your respect for my work, the way you see me as valuable just as I am. I love the words you carve and the careful way you listen and the fact that you make me feel less alone in the world. Bo closed his eyes as if her words caused him physical pain. You can't love me. Too late, Hannah said with a shaky laugh. I already do. The next morning brought a delegation to Hannah's farm, Dr. Harrison, Reverend Mackenzie, and Mayor Thompson, their faces set in the stern expressions of men convinced they were doing something necessary and unpleasant. Hannah, Dr. Harrison began, his tone as formal as if he were delivering a medical diagnosis. We've come to discuss your situation with Mr. Ellis. My situation is none of your concern, Hannah replied, but her heart was already sinking. She could sense the purpose of this visit in their rigid postures and careful expressions. I'm afraid it is our concern, said Reverend Mackenzie, his voice carrying the weight of moral authority. As leaders of this community, we have a responsibility to maintain certain standards of decency and propriety. What standards am I violating? Exactly. You're an unmarried woman living in close proximity to an unmarried man, Mayor Thompson said bluntly. People are talking, Hannah. They're questioning your virtue. Let them question, Hannah said, though she could feel heat rising in her cheeks. My conscience is clear. Perhaps, said Dr. Harrison, but perception matters in a community like ours, and the perception is becoming problematic. What are you asking me to do? The three men exchanged glances. Then Reverend Mackenzie cleared his throat. We're asking you to make your arrangement with Mr. Ellis official through marriage or to ask him to move on. The ultimatum hit Hannah like a physical blow, and if I refuse to do either, then we'll be forced to take other measures, Mayor Thompson said gravely. Your farm depends on the goodwill of this community, for supplies, for labor during harvest, for the social connections that make commerce possible. The threat was clear without being explicitly stated. Comply with their demands or face ostracism. That could destroy her livelihood. After the delegation left, Hannah found Bo in the barn, methodically cleaning tools with the intense focus he applied to tasks when he was deeply troubled. They want us to marry or separate, she said without preamble. Bo's hands stilled on the harness he was mending. I heard. I was in the loft when they arrived. What do you want to do? What I want doesn't matter, Bo said, his voice carefully controlled. What matters is what's best for you. Don't I get to decide what's best for me? Not when my presence is destroying your reputation. Hannah moved closer, close enough to see the tension in his shoulders, the careful way he avoided meeting her eyes. Bo, look at me. Reluctantly, he raised his head. If we married, she said carefully, would it be just to silence the gossips? Or would it be because you want to build a life with me? Hannah, answer me, please. Bo set down his tools and turned to face her fully. If I married you, he said slowly, it would be because I love you more than I thought it was possible to love another human being. Because you've given me back my reason for living. Because the thought of waking up without you makes me understand what real despair feels like. Hannah felt her breath catch. Then why won't you? Because I love you too much to trap you in a marriage with a broken man. Because you deserve better than someone who can't even hold you properly with both hands. You hold me just fine, Hannah said softly, reaching for his damaged hand and pressing it against her cheek. This hand has worked my farm, tended my animals, carved beautiful words into wood. It's not broken, it's just different. Hannah, marry me, she said. Suddenly, the words tumbling out before she could stop them. Not because the town demands it, but because we choose it. Because we want to build something together that's bigger than either of us alone. Bo stared at her as if she'd suggested. Something impossible. You're proposing to me? I suppose I am. Hannah felt a laugh bubble up despite the seriousness of the moment. Is that too scandalous for you? Bo struggled for words. It's the most beautiful thing anyone has ever offered me. Is that a yes? Instead of answering with words, Bo cupped her face in his hands, both hands, damaged and whole alike, and kissed her with a tenderness that spoke of love too deep for language. Over the following days, Hannah and Bo began to plan their wedding with the careful attention they'd previously devoted to farm projects. They decided on a simple ceremony in Hannah's garden, with only a few close friends present. Mrs. Patterson, Dr. Harrison, despite his earlier concerns, and perhaps one or two others who had shown them genuine kindness. "I want to write my own vows," Hannah told Bo as they sat on their bench one evening, watching the sunset paint the mountains purple and gold. "What will you say? That I'm not marrying you because I need rescuing, but because I want a partner. That I don't need you to complete me, but I want you to complement me. That I choose you not out of desperation, but out of love." Bo was quiet for a long moment. "I want to promise you things I'm not sure I can deliver," he said finally. "Such as strength when you need it, protection from whatever tries to harm you, a steady hand and a calm heart." "Bo," Hannah said gently, "I don't need you to be invulnerable. I need you to be real. I need you to be exactly who you are, scars, damage, midnight sorrows, and all. Even the nightmares. Especially the nightmares. They're part of your story, and I want to know all of your story." Bo took her hand in his good one, threading their fingers together. "I never thought I'd want to tell my whole story to anyone again. And now I can't imagine keeping any part of it from you." 3 days before their planned wedding, a stranger arrived in Silverton, a well-dressed man who introduced himself as James Morrison, Bo's former brother-in-law. Sarah's brother had come, he claimed, to check on Bo's welfare after hearing rumors of his impending marriage. "I have nothing against you personally, Miss Bellamy," James said as he sat in Hannah's parlor, his voice polite but cold. "But I feel I must speak honestly about the man you're planning to marry." Hannah felt Bo tense beside her, but she kept her voice level. "What concerns do you have, Mr. Morrison?" Bo was unstable after Sarah's death, violent at times. He blamed himself for what happened, and that guilt made him dangerous. "That's not true," Bo said quietly, but Hannah could hear the pain in his voice. "Isn't it?" James turned to Bo with something that might have been sympathy. "Don't you remember the night you tried to burn down the house where Sarah died? Or when you threatened Dr. Collins because you thought he hadn't done enough to save her?" Hannah felt Bo flinch as if he'd been struck. I wasn't thinking. Clearly then. "No, you weren't. And how can Miss Bellamy be sure that kind of instability won't return? How can she be certain she'll be safe with you?" "He would never hurt me," Hannah said firmly, but she could see doubt beginning to creep into Bo's eyes. "Perhaps not intentionally," James agreed. "But grief does things to a man's mind. Changes him in ways that can't always be predicted or controlled." That night, Bo was quieter than Hannah had ever seen him. He helped with the evening chores mechanically, his usual careful attention replaced by a distracted efficiency that worried her. "Talk to me," she said as they finished feeding the animals. "What if he's right?" Bo asked without looking at her. "What if I am dangerous? What if the grief and guilt I carry make me unreliable?" "Bo, I did threaten that doctor, Hannah. I was so angry, so desperate to blame someone for Sarah's death that I nearly attacked a man who'd done nothing wrong. But you didn't attack him. You controlled yourself." "Barely." Bo leaned against the barn wall, his face pale in the lamplight. "And the house. I did try to burn it down. I couldn't stand the thought of it standing empty when she should have been living in it." Hannah moved closer, close enough to see the anguish in his eyes. "You were grieving. People do irrational things when they're in pain. Irrational things that could hurt innocent people. Have you ever felt that kind of rage since you've been here?" Bo considered the question seriously. "No," he said finally. "Here, with you, I feel peaceful, like the anger has finally burned itself out." "Then trust that," Hannah said. "Trust what we've built together." "But what if James is right? What if something triggers that darkness again?" "Then we'll face it together," Hannah said simply. "That's what marriage means, facing whatever comes, together." The next morning brought another revelation when Mrs. Patterson arrived at Hannah's farm with disturbing news. "That Morrison fellow has been asking questions around town," she said, her expression troubled. But not the kind of questions a concerned brother-in-law would ask. "What kind of questions?" Hannah asked, though she suspected she wouldn't like the answer. "About your farm. About how much land you own, how profitable it is. He's been to the bank, to the land office. Hannah, I think he's been investigating your assets." The implications hit Hannah like a physical blow. "He's not here out of concern for Beau." "I don't think so, dear. I think he's here because he sees an opportunity." Beau appeared in the doorway, having overheard the conversation. His face was grim with understanding. "Sarah's family never forgave me for surviving when she didn't. If James can prove I'm unfit for marriage, if he can have me, declared mentally incompetent, he could claim guardianship over you," Hannah finished, the ugly picture becoming clear, "and control over any property you might acquire through marriage. Or," Mrs. Patterson added quietly, "he could simply ruin your reputation so thoroughly that the marriage becomes impossible, leaving Mr. Ellis with no choice but to move on." That afternoon, Hannah made a decision that surprised even herself. Instead of waiting for James Morrison to make his next move, she decided to confront him directly. She found him at the hotel, charming the desk clerk with stories of his successful business ventures in Denver. When he saw Hannah approaching, his smile became calculating. "Miss Bellamy, I hope you've given serious thought to our conversation yesterday." "I have," Hannah said calmly, "and I've reached a conclusion." "Oh, you're not here out of concern for Beau's welfare or mine. You're here because you see my farm as an asset you'd like to control." James's smile faltered slightly. "I'm sure I don't know what you mean." "I think you do. I think you've been investigating my property holdings, hoping to find a way to benefit from my marriage to Beau. That's a serious accusation." "It's also true." Hannah leaned forward slightly. "Here's what you need to understand, Mr. Morrison. I'm not some helpless woman who can be intimidated or manipulated. I've run my farm successfully for 3 years without any man's help, and I'm perfectly capable of protecting what's mine." "And what exactly are you threatening?" "I'm not threatening anything. I'm promising. If you try to interfere with my marriage or harm Beau in any way, you'll discover just how formidable a determined woman can be." James studied her face, perhaps seeing for the first time the steel beneath her gentle exterior. "You really love him." "I do. And I protect what I love, even if he's damaged, even if he might be dangerous." "Especially then," Hannah said without hesitation, "because that's what love means, standing by someone even when others won't." That evening, James Morrison made his final play. He arrived at Hannah's farm with Sheriff Bradley in tow, armed with documents he claimed proved Beau was mentally unfit for marriage. "These are medical records from Denver," James announced, spreading papers on Hannah's kitchen table. "They show a pattern of violent behavior and mental instability following my sister's death." Sheriff Bradley looked uncomfortable with his role in the proceedings, but he examined the documents with professional attention. "These do indicate some concerning incidents that occurred over 2 years ago," Hannah pointed out, "when Beau was in the acute stages of grief." "Mental instability doesn't simply disappear," James argued. "It can resurface at any time, especially under stress." "Like the stress of getting married?" Beau asked quietly. He'd been standing in the doorway, listening to the exchange with growing tension. "Exactly," James said with satisfaction. "The strain of new responsibilities, the pressure of trying to live up to a wife's expectations. It could easily trigger another episode." "And if it did?" Hannah asked, her voice dangerously calm. "Then you could be in real danger, Miss Bellamy. As could anyone else who happens to be nearby when he loses control." Hannah stood slowly, her movements deliberate and controlled. When she spoke, her voice carried an authority that surprised everyone in the room. "Mr. Morrison, you've made a serious error in judgment." "Have I?" "You've assumed that I'm a fragile flower who needs protection from the man I love." You've assumed that I haven't seen Beau at his worst and chosen him anyway. You've assumed that I'm marrying him out of desperation rather than deliberate choice. Hannah moved to stand beside Beau, taking his damaged hand in hers without hesitation. You want to know about Beau's mental state? He's the most mentally stable person I know. He faces his demons honestly instead of hiding from them. He acknowledges his limitations without using them as excuses. He treats every living thing with gentleness and respect. She turned to Sheriff Bradley. If you want to judge Beau's fitness for marriage, don't look at papers from 2 years ago. Look at what he's accomplished here. Look at how he's treated me, my animals, my property. Look at the man he is now, not the broken soldier he was when grief first overwhelmed him. Sheriff Bradley examined the farm through Hannah's kitchen window, the neat repairs, the thriving animals, the obvious care that had been lavished on every detail. Miss Bellamy makes a fair point, he said finally. A man's past troubles don't necessarily predict his future behavior, especially if he's found stability and purpose. Sheriff, James began. I'm sorry, Mr. Morrison, but I can't see any grounds for preventing this marriage. Mr. Ellis appears to be functioning well, and Miss Bellamy is clearly capable of making her own decisions. After James Morrison left Silverton, defeated and empty-handed, Hannah and Beau sat together on their bench, watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of gold and rose. You fought for me, Beau said wonderingly. Of course I did. You're worth fighting for. Even though he wasn't entirely wrong, even though I do carry darkness with me, Hannah turned to face him fully. Beau, everyone carries darkness. The difference is what you do with it. You've used yours to become more compassionate, more understanding of other people's pain. James Morrison has used his to become bitter and grasping. I love you, Beau said simply. More than I ever thought it was possible to love another person. I love you too, which is why I need you to understand something. What? I'm not marrying you to save you. I'm not marrying you because I pity you or because I think you need rescuing. I'm marrying you because you make me better, because you see value in who I am and what I've accomplished, because you make me feel like the most important person in the world. You are the most important person in the world, Beau said, cupping her face in his hands. You're my world. The days leading up to their wedding passed in a blur of small, precious preparations. Hannah altered her mother's wedding dress to fit her taller frame. Beau carved a special set of wedding rings from the same wood he'd used for his earlier messages, simple bands that would remind them daily of the words he'd carved around their farm. Mrs. Patterson arrived the morning of the wedding to help Hannah prepare, bringing with her a crown of wildflowers and a quiet blessing. Your mother would be proud, she said as she pinned Hannah's veil in place. You've chosen love over convenience, courage over safety. That takes a special kind of strength. I hope I'm making the right choice. Child, you're marrying a man who carves poetry into fence posts and treats your chickens like honored guests. If that's not the right choice, I don't know what is. The ceremony took place in Hannah's garden, among the fruit trees Beau had helped her tend and the flowers they'd planted together. Dr. Harrison officiated, having come to understand that their love was genuine and their commitment real. Do you, Hannah Rose Bellamy, Dr. Harrison asked, take this man to be your lawfully wedded husband, to have and to hold, in sickness and in health, for richer or poorer, for better or worse, for as long as you both shall live? I do, Hannah said, her voice clear and strong. I take all of him, the light and the shadows, the strength and the vulnerability, the man he was, the man he is, and the man he's becoming. And do you, Beauregard James Ellis, take this woman to be your lawfully wedded wife, to have and to hold, in sickness and in health, for richer or poorer, for better or worse, for as long as you both shall live? I do, Beau said, his voice rough with emotion. I promise to love her not because she needs me, but because she chooses me. I promise to be worthy of her trust, her love, and her faith in our future together. When Dr. Harrison pronounced them husband and wife, and Bo kissed Hannah with gentle reverence. The small gathering of friends cheered. But Hannah heard only the sound of her own heart, finally at peace. That evening, as Mr. and Mrs. Ellis sat on their bench watching the stars appear one by one, Hannah reflected on how much her life had changed. "Do you know what I realized today?" she asked. "What's that, Mrs. Ellis?" Bo said, and she could hear the smile in his voice as he used her new name. All those years of being called strange and peculiar, they weren't criticisms. They were preparations. I had to become strong enough to stand alone before I could be strong enough to stand with someone as damaged and beautiful as you. And I had to lose everything before I could appreciate the gift of starting over with you. Hannah leaned against his shoulder, feeling the solid warmth of him, the steady rhythm of his breathing. "I love being strange with you. I love being damaged with you. Think we'll be happy?" "I think," Bo said, pressing a kiss to the top of her head, "will be extraordinary." 6 months into their marriage, a letter arrived that would test everything Hannah and Bo had built together. It came from the territorial government, offering Bo a position as a liaison between veterans and agricultural settlements. Work that would take him away from the farm for months at a time, traveling throughout Colorado and beyond. "It's good work," Bo said as they read the letter together at their kitchen table. "Important work, helping other veterans find their footing, learn farming skills, transition back to civilian life." Hannah could hear the longing in his voice, the pull of purpose beyond their small farm. "You want to take it?" "Part of me does," Bo admitted. "These men, I understand what they're going through. I know what it feels like to come home broken and wonder if you'll ever be useful again. But I don't want to leave you. I don't want to leave this." He gestured around their kitchen, their home, the life they'd created together. Hannah studied his face, seeing the conflict there. She'd learned to read him well over the months of their marriage, and she could see both: the excitement the opportunity generated and the fear of losing what they had. "How long would you be gone?" 6 months initially. Maybe longer if the program expands." "And you'd be traveling constantly?" "Most of the time. Living in temporary quarters, working with different groups of veterans, moving on when they were established." Hannah felt her heart clench, but she also understood something else. This work could heal something in Bo that even their love hadn't quite reached. The guilt he carried over surviving when others hadn't. The sense that his suffering had been meaningless. "You should take it," she said quietly. Bo's head snapped up. "What?" "You should take the position. It's exactly the kind of work you were meant to do." "Hannah, I can't leave you to run the farm alone again. I ran it alone before you came, and I can run it while you're gone." Hannah reached across the table to take his hands. "Bo, this isn't about me needing you to stay. This is about you needing to go." Over the following days, as Bo prepared for his departure, Hannah found herself struggling with fears she hadn't expected. Not just the practical concerns of managing the farm alone again, but deeper worries about what his absence might mean for their marriage. "What if you don't come back?" she asked one evening as they lay together in their bed. "I'll come back," Bo said immediately. "Hannah, I'll always come back to you." "But what if the work changes you? What if you remember how much you enjoyed traveling, not being tied down to one place?" Bo propped himself up on his elbow to look at her. "Is that what you think this is? That I feel tied down here? Don't you sometimes?" "Never," Bo said with quiet intensity. "This farm, this life with you, it's not a trap, Hannah. It's home. It's the first real home I've had since before the war." "Then why does part of you want to leave?" Bo was quiet for a long moment, considering the question seriously. "Because I need to know I can do something meaningful with what I've learned from suffering. I need to know that surviving when Sarah didn't had a purpose beyond just existing." Hannah understood then. This wasn't about restlessness or dissatisfaction with their life. This was about Bo needing to transform his pain into something that could help others. "How long until you have to give them an answer?" 2 weeks. "Then, we have 2 weeks to prepare for you to say yes." Those 2 weeks passed in a blur of practical preparations, and emotional ones. Hannah threw herself into organizing the farm for Beau's absence, hiring a local boy to help with the heavy work, arranging with neighbors for assistance during emergencies, stockpiling supplies for the winter months. But the emotional preparations were harder. They were learning how to love each other across distance, how to maintain their connection when they wouldn't have the daily rhythms of shared work and quiet conversations to sustain them. "I'll write to you every day," Beau promised as he packed his few belongings. "And I'll write back," Hannah said, though she wondered if letters could carry the weight of everything they meant to each other. "If you need anything at all, you send word to the territorial office. They'll know how to reach me. I'll be fine, Beau. I'm not the same woman who needed rescuing." "You never needed rescuing," Beau said firmly. "But that doesn't mean you have to face everything alone." The night before his departure, they made love with desperate tenderness, trying to memorize each other's touch, each other's responses, each other's whispered words of love and promise. "I love you," Hannah whispered in the darkness. "I love you too. That's never going to change, no matter how far apart we are." Beau left on a crisp October morning, riding away on a horse provided by the territorial government, his few possessions packed in saddlebags behind him. Hannah stood in their farmyard and watched until he disappeared around the bend in the road, then kept watching until even the dust had settled. The silence that followed his departure was different from the solitude she'd known before their marriage. Before, she'd been alone but complete unto herself. Now she was half of something whole, and Beau's absence felt like a physical wound. But she was no longer the uncertain woman who had feared her own independence. Marriage had taught her that she could be both complete alone and part of something larger. She could miss Beau desperately while still functioning fully in his absence. "All right," she said to her chickens, who had gathered around her feed as if sensing her need for companionship. "It's just us again for a while. We can do this." True to his promise, Beau wrote every day. His letters arrived in bunches, carried by territorial messengers or fellow travelers, and Hannah treasured each one. "My dearest Hannah," one read, "Today I worked with a group of veterans trying to establish a settlement near Fort Collins. One of them, a man named Samuel, reminded me so much of myself when I first arrived at your farm, broken, ashamed, convinced he had nothing to offer the world. By the end of the day, he was laughing as he learned to milk a cow. I thought of you and how you saw value in me when I couldn't see it in myself." Hannah wrote back just as faithfully, telling him about the farm, the changing seasons, the small dramas of daily life that she knew he missed. The apple harvest was exceptional. This year, she wrote, "I think it's because you taught them to trust again after years of neglect. Mrs. Patterson says the preserves I made are the finest I've ever produced. I saved several jars for your return." But as weeks turned to months, the letters began to feel inadequate to the distance between them. How could words capture the way Hannah missed the sound of Beau's voice in the morning, the warmth of his body beside her in bed, the simple comfort of shared silence at the end of a long day? In December, disaster struck Hannah's farm when a severe winter storm brought down trees and damaged several buildings. The same young man she'd hired to help her was laid up with a broken leg, and Hannah found herself facing more work than she could handle alone. She might have asked for help from neighbors, but pride and the knowledge that many still disapproved of her unconventional marriage kept her from reaching out. Instead, she worked from dawn to dark, trying to repair storm damage while keeping up with daily chores. The physical exhaustion was manageable. The emotional weight was not. Standing in her damaged barn, looking at the collapsed beam that had crushed part of her chicken coop, Hannah finally allowed herself to cry. Not just for the immediate crisis, but for all the accumulated loneliness of the past months, for the fear that she and Beau were growing apart across the distance, for the nagging worry that he might find his new work more fulfilling than their quiet life together. "I miss you," she whispered to the empty barn. "I miss you so much it feels like dying." Meanwhile, 200 miles away, Beau was experiencing his own crisis of faith. The work was everything he'd hoped it would be: meaningful, important, a way to transform his suffering into something that helped others. But success came with its own temptations. "You're good at this," his supervisor, Colonel Matthews, told him after a particularly successful settlement project. "Have you considered making this permanent? The territory needs men like you, men who understand both military life and civilian challenges." "I'm married," Bo said automatically. "My wife has a farm. Bring her with you, or visit when you can. This work is too important to abandon for domestic obligations." The phrase domestic obligations stuck in Bo's mind like a thorn. Was that how others saw his marriage to Hannah? As an obligation that limited his potential rather than a partnership that enhanced his life? He wrote to Hannah that night, but for the first time, the words came slowly. How could he tell her about the doubt that was creeping into his thoughts? How could he admit that part of him was beginning to wonder if their quiet farm life was enough for a man who had rediscovered his sense of purpose? For 2 weeks, no letters came. Hannah told herself there were logical explanations: bad weather, delayed mail service, Bo being too busy with important work to write. But doubt gnawed at her like a persistent ache. When his letter finally arrived, it was shorter than usual and strangely formal. "Dear Hannah," it read, "the work here continues to go well. We've established 3 successful settlements and are planning 2 more. Colonel Matthews has suggested I consider making this position permanent. The territory needs experienced liaisons, and this work feels important in a way I hadn't expected. I hope you're well and the farm is managing without too much difficulty. Your devoted husband." Bo. Hannah read the letter 3 times, searching for the warmth and intimacy that had characterized his earlier correspondence. The formal tone, the mention of permanent positions, the casual reference to the farm managing, it all suggested a man who was pulling away, perhaps without even realizing it. She wrote back immediately, pouring her heart onto paper with desperate honesty. "My beloved Bo," she began, "your last letter frightened me. Not because of what you said, but because of what you didn't say. You wrote like a polite acquaintance rather than a husband who promised to love me forever. I understand that your work is important. It should be important. But I need to know that we're still important too. That I'm still important to you." She sent the letter with a territorial messenger, paying extra to ensure quick delivery. Then she waited. Bo received Hannah's letter while sitting around a campfire with a group of veterans he'd been helping establish a new settlement. Her words hit him like a physical blow, forcing him to confront the way he'd been unconsciously distancing himself from their marriage. "Bad news from home?" asked Samuel, the veteran Bo had written about earlier, noticing his stricken expression. "My wife thinks I'm abandoning her," Bo said quietly. "Are you?" The direct question startled Bo. "No, of course not." "Then why does she think you are?" Bo reread Hannah's letter, seeing it now through her eyes. The formal tone, the emphasis on his work over their relationship, the casual dismissal of her concerns about the farm. He'd been writing like a man who was moving on rather than a husband who was temporarily away. "Because I've been acting like this work matters more than she does," Bo admitted. "Does it?" "No," Bo said immediately, then stopped. "But sometimes I feel like it should. Like this work is more important than personal happiness." Samuel, who had been married for 10 years before the war, shook his head. "Son, you can't serve others well if you don't honor your own commitments. A man who abandons his wife for important work isn't a hero, he's just another deserter." The harsh words stung because they carried truth. Bo had been so focused on helping other veterans transition back to civilian life that he'd forgotten the most important civilian commitment of all, his marriage to Hannah. That night, Bo sat by the dying campfire and wrote the most important letter of his life. "My dearest Hannah," he began, "you're right to be frightened by my last letter. I was writing like a stranger because I was becoming one, not to you, but to myself. I was so caught up in the importance of this work that I forgot the most important thing of all, you. I've been thinking that serving others meant sacrificing personal happiness, But Samuel, one of the veterans here, helped me understand something crucial. A man who abandons his commitments isn't serving anyone. He's just running away in a different direction. I'm coming home, Hannah, not because the work isn't important, but because you're more important. Because what we've built together is the foundation that makes everything else possible. I can help other veterans from our farm just as well as I can from territorial camps. Better, actually, because I'll be doing it as a whole man rather than a divided one. I love you. I choose you. I choose us. Always. Your devoted husband. Bo. He sent the letter with the next messenger, then began making arrangements to complete his current assignment and return home. But fate had other plans. A week after sending his letter, Bo collapsed. During a settlement meeting, burning with fever and racked with chills. The territorial doctor diagnosed pneumonia, complicated by exhaustion and the lingering effects of his war injuries. 4 days, Bo drifted in and out of consciousness, tended by fellow veterans who had learned to care for each other in the absence of family. In his delirium, he called Hannah's name, reaching for her with his damaged hand, as if she might materialize beside his makeshift bed. "We need to send word to his wife," Samuel told Colonel Matthews. "She should know he's sick." "I'll send a messenger," the colonel agreed, but privately he wondered if Bo would survive long enough for Hannah to reach him. Meanwhile, Hannah had received Bo's love letter and was preparing for his return with joy that felt like sunlight after months of clouds. She cleaned their house until it gleamed, prepared his favorite foods, and planned small celebrations for his homecoming. She was hanging fresh curtains in their bedroom when the messenger arrived with news that shattered her world. Hannah didn't hesitate. She closed up the farm, arranged for neighbors to tend her animals, and set out immediately for the territorial camp where Bo lay dying. The journey took 3 days by wagon over rough mountain roads, and every mile felt like an eternity. She prayed as she'd never prayed before, not the formal prayers of church services, but desperate bargains with a God she hoped was listening. "Let him live," she pleaded. "Let me get there in time. I'll do anything, give up anything, just let him live." The camp, when she finally reached it, was a collection of tents and temporary buildings scattered across a windswept plain. She found Bo in the medical tent, unconscious and barely breathing, his face gaunt with illness. "Mrs. Ellis?" Samuel approached her gently. "He's been calling for you." Hannah sank into the chair beside Bo's cot, taking his burning hand in both of hers. "I'm here," she whispered. "I'm here, my love. I'm not going anywhere." For 5 days and nights, Hannah maintained her vigil beside Bo's bed. She bathed his fevered skin with cool water, spooned broth between his lips when he was conscious enough to swallow, and talked to him constantly whether he seemed to hear her or not. "Remember our apple trees?" she said during one long night. When his breathing was so shallow she feared each breath might be his last. "Remember how you said they needed patience to bear fruit? Well, I'm being patient now. I'm waiting for you to come back to me. The garden misses you," she continued another night. "Mrs. Patterson came by before I left, and she said the vegetables look lonely without you tending them. They're waiting for spring, just like I am." Samuel and the other veterans learned to work around her presence, bringing her food she rarely touched and blankets she ignored. They'd all heard Bo speak of his wife with reverence, but seeing her devotion firsthand gave them a new understanding of what love could look like. "She's been here 6 days, one of them murmured to Samuel. "Hasn't left his side for more than a few minutes. That's what love looks like when it's real," Samuel replied, thinking of his own wife waiting at home. On the 6th night, Bo's fever broke in a crisis that left everyone wondering if he would survive until morning. Hannah felt his hand go cold in hers, saw his breathing become so faint it was barely perceptible, and for a terrifying moment thought she'd lost him. "No," she said fiercely, gripping his hand tighter. "No, Bo Ellis, you don't get to leave me. Not now. Not when we've just found our way back to each other." She leaned close to his ear, her voice urgent with desperate love. "I need you to fight. I need you to come back to me. We have gardens to plant and storms to weather and a lifetime of quiet mornings together. You promised me extraordinary, remember? You can't deliver on that promise if you give up now. As dawn broke over the camp, Bo's eyes fluttered open for the first time in 6 days. His gaze found Hannah's face, and the faintest smile touched his cracked lips. "Hannah," he whispered, his voice barely audible. "I'm here," she said, tears streaming down her face. "I'm here, and I'm not going anywhere." Bo's recovery was slow but steady. As his strength returned, so did his awareness of how close he'd come to losing everything that mattered. Hannah had given up her farm responsibilities, traveled dangerous roads alone, and nursed him through the worst illness of his life without a moment's hesitation. "You came," he said one afternoon as she helped him sit up to eat. "Of course I came. Where else would I be? But the farm will survive without me for a few weeks. You wouldn't have." Bo studied her face, thinner now from days of worry and poor eating, lined with exhaustion but radiant with relief. "I wasn't fooled to think anything mattered more than this. More than us. You weren't a fool. You were a man trying to find meaning in his suffering. I understand that need. But I almost lost you in the process." "No," Hannah said firmly. "You could never lose me. Distance couldn't do it, illness couldn't do it, and doubt couldn't do it. I'm yours, Bo Ellis, through everything." As soon as Bo was strong enough to travel, they began making plans to return home. But first, Bo had a conversation with Colonel Matthews about his future with the territorial program. "I want to continue the work," Bo said, "but from my own farm. I can establish a program to help veterans transition to agricultural life by bringing them to us, teaching them hands-on while they help with our operation." "That's an interesting proposal," the colonel said. "You'd be willing to take on that responsibility?" "My wife and I would be willing," Bo corrected. "This would be a partnership, not just my project." Hannah, who had been listening from the doorway, felt her heart swell with love for this man, who had learned to include her in his dreams rather than choosing between them and her. The journey home took a week, with frequent stops to rest Bo's still recovering strength. But every mile brought them closer to the life they'd built together, and Hannah felt her spirit lifting with each familiar landmark. When their farm finally came into view, the neat fields, the sturdy buildings, the fruit trees beginning to show the first hints of spring buds, Hannah felt complete for the first time in months. "It looks exactly the same," Bo marveled. "It should." Mrs. Patterson and the neighbors took good care of everything. But as they approached the house, Hannah noticed something different. There were fresh flowers planted by the front door, and new curtains in the windows. A sign by the gate read, "Welcome home, Mr. and Mrs. Ellis," in Mrs. Patterson's careful handwriting. "The whole town knows we're coming back today," Hannah realized. "Are you ready for the attention?" Hannah considered the question seriously. Months ago, she would have dreaded the scrutiny, the whispered conversations about their unconventional marriage and Bo's extended absence. But now she felt only gratitude for the community that had cared for their property and welcomed them home. "I'm ready for anything, as long as we're facing it together." Over the following weeks, Bo and Hannah settled back into the rhythm of farm life, but with new dimensions. Bo's near-death experience had changed him, made him more appreciative of simple pleasures and daily blessings. Hannah's vigil had shown her the depth of her own strength and commitment. They began implementing Bo's plan to help other veterans transition to civilian life. The first group, Samuel and 3 other men, arrived in late spring, living in the renovated barn while they learned agricultural skills and saved money to start their own homesteads. "It's like having sons," Hannah told Mrs. Patterson as they watched Bo teaching the men how to properly care for livestock. "Grown sons who need healing more than discipline," Mrs. Patterson observed wisely. "Yes, and watching Bo help them heal, it's healing him too." By summer, the veteran program was thriving. Word had spread throughout the territory about the Ellis Farm's success in helping former soldiers transition to peaceful, productive lives. Applications poured in from men seeking not just agricultural training, but the kind of emotional healing that came from working with people who understood their struggles. Hannah found herself cooking for 8 people most nights, managing a garden that had tripled in size, and serving as unofficial counselor to men who needed to talk through their war experiences with someone who wouldn't judge their pain. "This is more work than we ever planned on," she told Bo one evening as they sat on their bench, watching the sunset. "Are you sorry?" Hannah considered the question, thinking about the laughter that now filled their farmyard, the sense of purpose that energized Bo's every movement, the deep satisfaction of knowing their home had become a place of healing for broken men. "No," she said finally. "I'm not sorry at all. This feels like what we were meant to do." 1 year after Bo's return, Hannah stood in her garden watching him work with a new group of veterans. The man who had once been broken by war was now helping others piece their lives back together. The woman who had once been considered too strange for love was now the heart of a community dedicated to healing. Samuel, who had stayed on as Bo's assistant, approached her with a letter. "This came for you, Mrs. Ellis, from the territorial government." Hannah opened the letter with curiosity that turned to amazement as she read. The territorial governor was commending their veteran rehabilitation program and offering substantial funding to expand it. They wanted to establish the Ellis Farm as an official training center for agricultural veterans throughout the region. "Bo," she called, walking toward where he stood with the new veterans. "You need to see this." As he read the letter, Hannah watched recognition dawn in his eyes. This was validation not just of their work, but of their choice to build something together rather than pursuing individual dreams. "What do you think?" he asked. "I think," Hannah said, looking around at the bustling farm, the healing men, the life they created from their individual brokenness. "I think we're about to become even more extraordinary." The expansion brought new challenges. More veterans meant more mouths to feed, more personalities to manage, more individual traumas to navigate. Hannah found herself not just running a farm, but essentially managing a small community. Some days were harder than others. When Jacob, a veteran who'd lost his leg at Shiloh, smashed his dinner plate in frustration at his limitations. When Michael, who'd been a prisoner of war, woke screaming every night for 2 weeks. When Thomas, a former cavalry officer, couldn't adapt to the slower pace of farm life and left abruptly one morning with only a terse note of thanks. "We can't save them all," Bo told Hannah after a particularly difficult week when 2 veterans had left and another had suffered what the doctor called a nervous collapse. "I know," Hannah replied, "but we can offer them all a chance. What they do with it is up to them." But for every failure, there were multiple successes. Samuel, who had now been with them for over a year, had saved enough money to purchase his own land and was planning to marry a local schoolteacher. James, a former artillery specialist, had discovered a gift for animal husbandry and was helping Hannah expand their livestock operation. Peter, who had arrived unable to speak about his war experiences, was now leading discussion groups for newer veterans. "You should be proud," Dr. Harrison told Hannah during one of his regular visits to check on the veterans' health. "This program is becoming a model for the entire territory." "We're all proud," Hannah replied, watching Bo demonstrate proper grafting techniques to a group of attentive students. "This feels like what we were meant to do with our lives." In the autumn of their 2nd year running the veteran program, Hannah made a discovery that changed everything. She was pregnant. She told Bo privately one evening as they sat in their kitchen, the house quiet for once with all the veterans settled in their quarters. "Are you sure?" he asked, his voice filled with wonder. "Dr. Harrison confirmed it this morning. The baby should arrive in late spring." Bo pulled her into his arms, holding her with the gentle strength she'd come to treasure. "How do you feel about it?" "Terrified," Hannah admitted. "Happy, overwhelmed, grateful, all at once." All at once. They sat in comfortable silence, contemplating how a baby would change their already complex life. The veteran program would continue, but they'd need to adapt their approach, perhaps focus on fewer men at a time. What if I'm not a good mother? Hannah asked suddenly. You've been mothering broken men for 2 years, Bo reminded her. You'll be an exceptional mother to our child. Word of Hannah's pregnancy spread through their small community of veterans with surprising speed. These men, many of whom had lost their own families to war or distance, embraced the news with joy that touched Hannah's heart. We need to build a proper nursery, declared Samuel, who had appointed himself unofficial project manager. And baby furniture, added James, whose woodworking skills had improved dramatically under Bo's tutelage. The child will need protection, said Peter seriously, as if planning the defense of a military position. Hannah watched these battle-hardened men transform into excited uncles-to-be and felt her fears about balancing motherhood with their veteran program begin to ease. This baby wouldn't just be hers and Bo's. It would be raised by an entire community of people who understood the value of family and protection. But their community faced its greatest test when Robert Morrison, James Morrison's nephew, arrived. Seeking help, the young man had been conscripted into the army during the final year of the war and returned home deeply traumatized and unable to adjust to civilian life. I know my uncle caused you trouble, Robert said awkwardly during his interview with Bo and Hannah. I understand if you won't take me. Hannah studied the young man's face, seeing echoes of James Morrison's features, but none of his calculating coldness. This was simply a damaged boy who needed help. Your uncle's actions have nothing to do with you, she said firmly. If you're willing to work and follow our rules, you're welcome here. Robert's time at the farm became a healing process not just for him, but for Hannah and Bo as well. Helping James Morrison's nephew overcome his trauma felt like a completion of something that had begun years earlier with their confrontation over Bo's fitness for marriage. Hannah's pregnancy progressed smoothly through the winter months, and by spring she was glowingly healthy despite her expanding waistline. The veterans had rallied around her with touching protectiveness, taking over her heavier chores without being asked and treating her with the reverence usually reserved for saints. They're going to spoil this baby terribly, she told Boaz. They watched James and Peter arguing over the proper design for a baby cradle. Good, Bo replied. A child should be spoiled by people who love them. As her due date approached, Hannah found herself reflecting on the journey that had brought them to this point. From the woman no one wanted to marry to the heart of a thriving community, from the broken soldier who thought he had nothing to offer to the leader of a program that was healing dozens of men. Their transformation felt miraculous. The baby arrived on a perfect May morning, with Dr. Harrison attending and half the veteran community pacing anxiously outside. Sarah Rose Ellis made her entrance into the world with a healthy cry that brought tears to every eye present. She's perfect, Bo whispered, holding his daughter with the careful reverence of a man who understood how precious and fragile new life could be. She looks like you, Hannah said, though the baby actually looked like most newborns, red, wrinkled, and vaguely indignant about the whole birth process. She has your stubborn chin, Bo countered, and they both laughed at the ridiculousness of trying to assign features to someone who was only hours old. The veterans, when finally allowed to meet their newest community member, were unanimously smitten. Samuel appointed himself chief guardian. James began planning an elaborate toy chest, and Peter started researching the best educational philosophies for raising intelligent children. When Sarah was 3 months old, a familiar figure appeared. At their farm, Thomas Miller, Hannah's former fiancé, looking older and somewhat less confident than the man who had abandoned her at the altar years earlier. "Hello, Hannah," he said awkwardly as she sat on the front porch with the baby. That is, I wanted to congratulate you on your marriage and your child." "Thank you," Hannah replied politely, feeling none of the old pain his presence might once have caused. "How are you, Thomas?" I'm married now. Have been for 2 years." My wife is expecting our first child. Congratulations. Thomas shifted uncomfortably, clearly having more to say but struggling with how to say it. Hannah, I owe you an apology. For the wedding, for leaving without explanation, for everything. Thank you, Hannah said simply. I appreciate that. I was young and scared, and I suppose I thought I could find something better, something easier. Hannah looked down at her daughter, sleeping peacefully in her arms, then toward the barn where Bo was working with the newest group of veterans. And did you find something better? Thomas followed her gaze, taking in the bustling farm, the obvious prosperity, the sense of purpose that radiated from every building and field. No, he said quietly. I found something easier, but not better. Never better. I hope you'll be happy, Thomas. I hope your wife and child bring you joy. And I hope you can forgive me for not being the man you deserved. I forgave you years ago, Hannah said, and realized as she spoke that it was true. Not because you deserved forgiveness, but because carrying anger would have prevented me from recognizing real love when it found me. After Thomas left, Bo emerged from the barn and found Hannah still sitting on the porch with Sarah. How was that? He asked, settling beside her. Satisfying, Hannah said with surprise. I thought it might be painful, but it was actually satisfying. Like closing a book you'd already finished reading. Any regrets? Hannah looked at this man who had seen her worth when no one else could, who had built a life with her based on partnership rather than possession, who had given her not just love but purpose. Only one, she said. What's that? That I wasted. So much time thinking I needed someone else's approval to be worthy of love. As summer deepened into autumn, Hannah found herself standing in the same spot where she'd first encountered Bo, by her barn, watching him work with damaged men who were learning to hope again. But now she held their daughter in her arms, watching their extended family of veterans go about their tasks with the confidence of men who had found their place in the world. Mrs. Ellis called Samuel, who was preparing to leave for his own farm after 2 years with them. Thank you for everything, for seeing potential in broken men, for making this place a home, for believing we could heal. Thank you for letting us be part of your healing, Hannah replied. That evening, as they sat on their bench with Sarah, sleeping between them, Hannah and Bo reflected on the journey that had brought them from individual loneliness to this moment of complete fulfillment. Do you remember, Hannah asked, when you carved some gardens are worth tending on my barn door? I remember. I thought you were talking about my vegetables. I was talking about you, Bo said softly. About us. About the life we could grow together if we were patient enough to let it flourish. And we were patient. We were. And look what grew. They sat in comfortable silence, watching the stars appear one by one over their farm, their home, their life together. In the distance, they could hear the veterans talking quietly around their evening fire, voices filled with the kind of peace that came from knowing you belonged somewhere. 1 year later, Hannah stood in her garden on a perfect spring morning, watching her 18-month-old daughter toddle between the vegetable rows while Bo taught a new group of veterans how to properly prune fruit trees. The farm bustled with purposeful activity, men learning not just agricultural skills, but how to live with hope again. Mrs. Patterson approached through the garden gate, carrying a newspaper that she waved excitedly. Hannah, dear, you need to see this. The newspaper contained an article about their veteran rehabilitation program, written by a journalist from Denver who had visited the previous month. But it was the headline that took Hannah's breath away. From spinster to savior, how one woman's love transformed a community. The Ellis Farm, Mrs. Patterson read aloud, represents more than agricultural success. It stands as testament to the transformative power of unconditional love and acceptance. Mrs. Hannah Ellis, once considered an unmarriageable oddity by her neighbors, has become the heart of the most successful veteran rehabilitation program. In the territory, Hannah felt tears prick her eyes, not from the praise but from the recognition of how far they'd all come. The town that had once pitted her was now proud to claim her as their own. Bo appeared at her side, having overheard the reading. "What do you think of that, Mrs. Ellis? You're famous." "We're famous," Hannah corrected, taking his hand. "This was never just my work." "The article mentions that too," Mrs. Patterson continued reading. "But perhaps the most remarkable aspect of the Ellis farm is not its success rate with traumatized veterans, but the love story at its center. Hannah and Bo Ellis have created more than a rehabilitation program. They've built a demonstration of what becomes possible when two people see the best in each other and refuse to let the world convince them otherwise." As Mrs. Patterson finished reading, Sarah toddled over to her parents, her chubby hands full of flowers she'd picked from the garden. Hannah scooped up her daughter, marveling at how this child would grow up surrounded by love and acceptance, never doubting her worth or wondering if she deserved happiness. "The town called her a spinster," Bo said quietly, echoing words he'd carved into a fence post years earlier. "But I called her home." Hannah looked around at the life they'd built, at the thriving farm, the healing veterans, their beautiful daughter, the community that had grown around their love. None of it had been planned, but all of it had been chosen, day by day, with courage and faith and the quiet determination to believe in something better. In the distance, she could see Samuel returning for a visit with his new wife, their own baby due any day. James was showing Robert Morrison how to properly harness the draft horses, both men laughing at some shared joke. Peter was reading to a group of newer veterans under the apple tree Bo had planted for their first anniversary. "You know what I realized?" Hannah asked as they stood together, surrounded by the beautiful chaos of their chosen family. "What's that?" "All those years when I thought I was waiting for someone to choose me, I was actually learning to choose myself. And that's what made it possible for us to choose each other." Bo lifted Sarah onto his shoulders, where she clapped her hands in delight at the new view. "And what did we choose?" Hannah looked around once more at their extraordinary life, messy, challenging, overflowing with purpose and love, and the daily miracle of damaged people healing together. "We chose everything," she said simply. "We chose it all." As the sun climbed higher over their farm, painting everything in golden light, Hannah felt the deep satisfaction of a life lived fully. She had been the woman no one wanted to marry, and Bo had been the man the world had broken. But together, they had become something neither could have achieved alone. They had become home for each other and for everyone who needed a place to heal. The town had called her strange, peculiar, too independent for her own good. He had called her precious, capable, worthy of love exactly as she was. And in the end, his voice was the only one that mattered. Did this story move you? Type "she" deserved love in the comments. And subscribe if you believe the world needs more stories like this. Share this with someone who needs to remember that the right person will love you not despite your differences, but because of them. Thank you for joining us on Hannah and Bo's journey. Your support helps us keep telling stories that heal hearts and inspire hope.